Smash tournaments are most known for their singles brackets, with doubles also being at most events, and crew battles being the next highest in frequency. There's also a lot of other experimental rule sets, most commonly shown off at invitationals, along with some majors like Super Smash Con and Collision. Usually it's some kind of novelty event like randoms, reverse mains, low tiers only, Giant Smash, Squad Strike for Ultimate, and Richie Jungle Jam for Melee. These formats are implemented mainly to either fill the dead air on Fridays or to give more value to attendees at the venue. Regardless, they are not taken that seriously, with low prize pools and little viewership if any. However, Super Smash Con has gotten multiple novelty events to have a large amount of focus. The most well known is probably the Smash 64 Combo Contest. This showcase of the original platform fighter has gotten millions of views, thanks to players traveling from across the world, 64 being the Smash title with the most hits done, and the difficulty and creativity of the combos. It's clear that while it has declined a bit in excitement and prestige, it is still a staple for many people to care about every year. But there's another format that I'd like to focus on. Back in 2016, SmashCon decided to host a single elimination invitational using Smash 64, Melee, Brawl, and Smash for Wii U, to decide who was the best player across all of them. This event was called Smash Masters. Smash Masters became one of the most prestigious side events at SmashCon, if not for the entire year. It was unique in that there were actually some stakes behind it. Instead of randomness or a lower skill ceiling, this format gave the opportunity for players to prove how skilled they were in multiple Smash games in the same set. I am someone that usually enters multiple games whenever I attend an event, so I appreciate how good someone can be at multiple games. I watched all 4 iterations of Smash Masters from 2016 to 2019, and enjoyed how they brought together players from multiple games. However, Smash Masters has not been brought back at the Virginia Supermajor since 2019. A few locals have run versions of the format occasionally, but few if any top players have been able to compete to prove who is the best across all Smash titles. I really want to see it brought back with a few adjustments. Let's go over the history of the event. Smash Masters was ran for 4 years at SmashCon, 3 of them being before Smash Ultimate's release. This meant that there were an even number of Smash titles, which means that a normal set couldn't really happen. Instead of having a best of 3 or a best of 5 like Smash tournaments usually run, a best of 4 can have a lot of complications. In deciding the first game chosen in the set, there can't be a fair process for picking the most neutral game, since there can be the same amount of bans for each player. And more importantly, if both players happen to win 2 games, what happens? This is why SmashCon decided to have some tiebreaker option. In 2016, there were only 4 players in a single elim bracket. They ran individual best of 3 sets for each Smash game, and while the order sometimes changed, all 4 games were played regardless if the set was already mathematically over. I'd say that's not too bad since you get to showcase every game for every set. However, the tiebreaker rules were a little weird. Obviously, if someone won 3 or all 4 of the sets, then they were the winner. But if they were 2-2, it would go down to game count. So 2 O's versus 2 1s were a big deal. And if somehow game count was the exact same, then big victories were considered for the final tiebreak. Specifically, if a game was won by 3 or 4 stocks in 64 and Melee, or 2 or 3 stocks for Brawl and Smash 4, then the game would be called a big victory. 2017 and 2018 had 8 players in the event instead of 4, but kept a single elim bracket, and the tiebreaker format was kept mostly the same. The only change being Smash 64 switching to 4 stocks instead of 5, which is what the main Smash 64 singles tournament started going by. In 2019, Smash Ultimate was added to the roster, causing there to be 5 titles and removing the need for tiebreakers like game count or big victories, by just doing a best of 5 of all the Smash games, while still keeping a best of 3 for each game. I think that this is the best format they attempted. I'm sure they would have loved to do a normal best of 5 in prior years, but they didn't have a 5th proper Smash game to add, and they probably wouldn't want to take one away. Additionally, they didn't try and add any other platform fighters into the mix. Mods like Project M weren't included because of Nintendo, and in order to keep it Smash exclusive, they didn't include any other platform fighters like Rivals or Slap City. Now that there was a 5th game after Ultimate's release, this format would truly be balanced and even more competitive than it previously was. Surely nothing in the world would change. Like most things in offline fighting games, quarantine caused many ambitious projects to be on pause for over a year, some never to return again. While SmashCon hasn't done Smash Masters again, I think that there is definitely potential for the format to have a resurgence, whether it be at the newly minted Supernova or a different event entirely. In fact, I decided to host 2 different Smash Masters events for my local scene, one as a standalone event and one during our bi-monthly series, Flame Choke. The first one unfortunately wasn't on the best day for many of our players. It was fall break and many college students were out of town or busy that Saturday. Personally, I brought 3 TVs and 2 consoles, but who's counting? Anyway, we had a pretty good combination of players. Our second best Ultimate player with some Smash 4 experience, our best Smash 4 player back in 2018 that was top 5 in Ultimate at one point and has played a lot of Melee, our number 6 Melee player that frequently enters our Ultimate weeklies, a 64 and Brawl enjoyer that got his start in Melee, an Ultimate 1-2er that's also been on our Rivals PR for 5 seasons in a row, and a TO that dabbles in every game a little bit. While this is not quite the global talent that Smash Masters had seen in previous years, it was a solid roster for our first go at it. I decided to have each Smash game be a best of 1, so the set would be a normal best of 5, with each Smash game being able to be picked one time. After some classic tardiness from a couple of the players, we got started, and saw some very close sets. Some players had 5 unique characters, while others may or may not have picked Captain Falcon no matter the version. Little Mac was a common pick among players that didn't have much Smash 4 or Ultimate experience. Kirby was a 64 staple, Sheik was commonly picked in Melee, and Marth or Falco were picked in Brawl. Some people would warm up in games they weren't confident in to try and improve over the course of the event. Besides a Melee player, who kept playing Melee because he loves Melee. I guess Logi definitely wasn't going to get 3-0'd. Eventually, the TO and the Rivals player were eliminated at 5th place, but the Rivals player did take the 64 and Brawl enjoyer to Game 5. Winner semis were also both Game 5s, with Brawl being the deciding factor in both sets. Once we got to top 4, Logi actually got a win in 64 over Khan, who was expected to sweep every 64 game, and had enough Ultimate experience to secure the victory, while Winners Finals was a close 3-0. Zero, the Ultimate player, actually would counterpick with his weaker games, choosing to go Melee and Smash 4 after losing Brawl Game 1 instead of 64 or Ultimate, both of which he was favored in. I noticed that a couple other players were also doing some unconventional counterpicks, so I asked them why. Zero said that the order doesn't really matter. You just need to win 3 out of 5 games. And instead of picking his best games when he was down, he decided to pick his weaker games in order to have a stage counterpick. In case it wasn't clear, we went by each game's counterpick rules, so he was able to have stronger counterpicks in Melee with no bans, and Smash 4 with 1, compared to Ultimate with 2 bans, and 64 with only 1 legal stage in the game. I definitely wasn't expecting it, but I guess it's a fair strategy. In Losers Finals, it was a close Game 5 with Zero picking 5 different characters, and Logi sticking with either Captain Falcon or Fox across all games. The 2 most neutral games for that matchup were picked first, and as long as Zero was the victor in one of them, he was almost guaranteed to win the set, while Logi needed to win both neutral games. Logi got the 64 win, but lost in Brawl, causing the set to be pretty much decided, with Zero winning Ultimate, Logi winning Melee, and Zero winning Smash 4. Grand Finals was a rematch of Winners Finals, but there wouldn't be a 3-0 this time. In fact, Set 1 was the strangest of the day. They started out with 64, 0-1 with not that much surprise, since he used to enter our 64 weeklies back in the day, but then Average counterpicked Ultimate, Zero's best game. Average then defeated Zero's Falco with Pokemon Trainer in a pretty huge upset. With Melee and Smash 4 being in Average's favor, and Brawl being a toss-up, it looked like it was over. But Zero won in Brawl to go up 2-1. Then Average decided to pick Smash 4, leaving Melee to be the potential Game 5. And then Zero picked Mario to defeat Average's Diddy Kong to win the set. The best Ultimate player by far just lost in Ultimate, and the best Smash 4 player by far just lost in Smash 4, in the same set, to each other. Now they were definitely the second best in the game they got upset in, but I thought that the gap was way too big for them to overcome. Zero used to be ranked in Alabama, and has cemented himself as a top 20 or so player in MDVA, top 3 in our sub-region, and a very consistent threat at whatever event he attends. Average was our former number 1 in Smash 4, and still regularly plays, whether it be online tournaments, SmashCon, or bring his Wii U to monthlies for money matches. But hey, each game was a best of 1, and when you're having to switch multiple Smash games in the same set, anything can happen. In set 2, we saw another close set, this time with each of them winning their best game and avoiding another upset. 0-1 in 64, Average won in Melee, with Brawl being the deciding game yet again. In a narrow victory, Average's Falco defeated Zero's Marth, winning the entire event and the $25 that went with it. Each player gave their opinion of the event afterwards, with the consensus being that it was a unique opportunity and also fun, despite the difficulty and the slower pace of bracket with having to switch setups frequently. I had a lot of fun watching and organizing the event, with several others not in attendance sad that they didn't get the chance. So, I decided to host another one at our next monthly. I had the start time be pretty early in the day to not interfere with other brackets, but I think that it didn't get many entrants because of it being so much earlier than everything else. I still think it was the right decision to not have it be so close to other brackets, but it may be good to not have it be the first event of the day in the future. Also, we had kind of a big drawback. We didn't have a Smash 4 setup. I knew 2 people that could potentially have brought their Wii U, but unfortunately neither of them were able to attend. So it wasn't a proper best of 5, because we didn't have every Smash game. So I had the 5th option be rock, paper, scissors as a default, with a gentleman's agreement to repeat one of the games, which is what most people did. The players we had were a pretty good Melee Donkey Kong main, a Melee Jigglypuff that used to win all of our 64 brackets, a top 5 Ultimate player, a newer Melee player, and the 64 and Brawl enthusiast from last time. The seeding was pretty accurate last time, but this time there were some upsets. The 2 best Melee players each won their first match, with Granny also defeating Grog, who I expected to be the heavy favorite since he was the only player with lots of Ultimate experience and is solid in every game, but was defeated in his first set. The newer Melee player got 5th, and the 64 and Brawl enthusiast got 4th, both nearly losing in Game 5 sets. Granny was able to defeat 5 underscores to get winner's side of Grants, with Grog also defeating 5 underscores, both of those sets being Game 5. Grand Finals traded sets between Granny and Grog, some games like Ultimate and Melee being foregone conclusions while 64 and Brawl were close, with Granny being the victor. It seemed like most players decided a Gentleman's to 64 as their repeated game, in the absence of Smash 4. Most people had played 64 enough to be comfortable with it. It was the simplest with one stage choice and a few characters, and each game I saw was fast and exciting. While it wasn't the proper Smash Masters since one game was absent, it was still a cool event to organize and witness. After running multiple different Smash Masters events, let's go into detail about what is good about it. First of all, I think it's got 5 games that all have depth and require skill to be good at. There can be other inspired versions like Rivals Masters with Rivals 1, Rivals 2, and either Rivals 1 Workshop or Rivals 1 Tetherball. Ludosity Masters with Nazby 1, Nazby 2, and Slap City, or even a larger Plat Masters format with Smash, Brawlhalla, Nazby, Rivals, Multiverses, and many other platform fighters. But for now, let's just focus on the mainline Smash series. Next, the hardware isn't too difficult for pre-existing Smash scenes to obtain. Wiis and Switches are very common at tournaments. Technically, a Wii can run Brawl, Melee, and also 64 through Virtual Console. And Ultimate is so popular that there would be next to no issue getting a setup for it. The main difficulty is Smash 4. But with it being the most recent predecessor, inevitably there's still some Smash 4 veterans that are still active in the scene. So getting a Wii U wouldn't be too bad. If people want to be authentic and play the original Smash on Nintendo 64, then getting a console and controllers would be more difficult. But N64s aren't super rare and are also likely still owned by a few active players. And controller adapters or wireless Hori pads are also an option if 64 controllers aren't viable. It's far from perfect, but with some working together, I think it's very possible for many different grassroots tournaments to be able to run all 5 games. And third, it's a revolutionary format that allows for people to prove how good they are across all Smash games. And there hasn't really been many other instances of a format with the ability to play multiple games in the same bracket. However, there are some drawbacks as a whole, as well as depending on the format used. It can take a while for each individual set to be completed, just with changing consoles and controllers, figuring out counterpicks, and warming up between games. While many people still own Nintendo consoles with each respective Smash title, it's no guarantee that you'll have enough setups for every game. Sure, each game doesn't require a $1,000 PC, but you do need multiple consoles, preferably one for each game, along with 3 CRTs and 2 monitors that go with it if you're trying to have multiple sets run at the same time. And while some people value being good at multiple Smash games at the same time, many people just don't. There may not be that many people that want to dedicate the time and effort to Smash Masters, so entrant numbers may not be as much as your usual singles bracket. But despite these drawbacks, I think it's still worth it for tournaments of every scale to try it out at least once. There are some options for how to run a Smash Masters event. Let's go through some of the ones I came up with. Instead of having single elimination, I think double elimination bracket is better for the players and can keep viewership. There could be a side stream or recording setup for some loser sets if time is an issue. Either way, half of the players in a single elim bracket would only play one time and have no opportunity to prove themselves, especially if they lost to the eventual winner in an early round. SmashCon mostly did an 8-player invitational, but I think that can be too limiting if the goal is to find out who is the best across all games. A larger invitational, like 16 players or even an open bracket, can be more difficult to run, but I think it's worth it by making the bracket more stacked. SmashCon also did a mini best of 3 for each of the games, which I think promotes more consistency but can really slow down the set. I would rather have a best of 1 for each game inside of the best of 5 and do double elimination instead of doing best of 3s for each game and do single elimination. Many of the SmashCon sets were foregone conclusions and dragged on for more time than necessary, and player fatigue can be an issue if the player has to play for so long. Best of 3s for each game can lead to there being up to 15 games being played in each set, which is kind of crazy and something I think is worth avoiding the risk of. Up to TO discretion, maybe most of a bracket can be best of 1 for each Smash game, with top 3 having best of 3 for each, or something like that. I think the best of 5 format that SmashCon did in 2019, and I use for my events, is the best scenario. Like I mentioned earlier, there are some other Plat Masters options that can be done. I know Platfight in Florida just did something like that. I do think mainline Smash titles will probably get the most interest for casual viewership. I do think there's a future with the platform fighter crossovers too, but I'm just going to focus on Smash 64, Melee, Brawl, Smash 4, and Ultimate. Stock counts and stadiums should probably stay the same as the singles formats for each game. While Smash 4 might be easier to make an upset due to the lower stock count compared to 64 and Melee, along with dynamic counterpicks like in Melee and Brawl, I think sticking to each game's usual rule set is ideal. I've heard it argued that there should be 3 stocks for every game to make it more balanced, but I don't really think that's necessary. Maybe Smash 4 can be increased from 2 to 3, but I don't think Melee and 64 should decrease. And yeah, more extreme counterpicks can start to get gimmicky, but I don't think stages play too much of a factor in this format. And here's a couple other variants of Smash Masters. Each player bans 2 Smash games to reach the most neutral game. Have an hour or so to grind that game, then play a best of 5 for that game only. For instance, if someone strikes Melee, the other person strikes Smash 4 and Ultimate, and the other strikes 64, they have an hour to study for their Brawl set. That means they will play a best of 5 in Brawl, and they'll have an hour to try and learn as much as they can. Sometimes the most neutral game is the decider of the set, so having the players go an entire set in that game, with some intense practice as an arms race, could be an interesting format. I understand that this wouldn't guarantee that every Smash game gets their shine. If 2 Melee players just wanted to play Melee, then it wouldn't be really in the spirit of the event. I would still like to try it at some point though. The other one is separate singles events for each bracket, and giving points based on performance in each game. One thing that can be difficult to measure in Smash Masters is how much better someone is at a game. Like a 4 stock in one game doesn't count more than a last stock high percent game in another. So giving the ability for people to show how much better they are in one game while still showing their prowess across the board can be cool. I've done a similar idea at some of my events with a cash prize to the 5-player team with the most points. And if there was infinite time, stamina, and enthusiasm, I think that having 5 singles brackets with players being a part of multiple games would be really cool. Maybe a large enough prize pool could convince them. But realistically, players would rather enter a side event than enter 4 extra singles brackets, so I'm not sure how much success this format would have on a larger scale. Overall, I think the ideal format is up to 16 players in a double elimination bracket with best of 1 for each game inside of a best of 5. I encourage any TOs out there to try it out. Even if it's a free entry side event, I think it's worth doing at least once. I really enjoyed putting my events together and watching them play out. And as long as you get the setups, it should be fun and exciting. Being good at multiple games is always impressive, and I would love for Smash Masters to be a part of the side event spotlight again.